History is a mystery. The more I see, the more I, read. Despite the adage, history is not written by the victor. It is more written by the one who holds the pen, be it either the scribe, the intellectual, or the random soul with a stylus. History is the collected result of these scribbles. Some are more interesting or mysterious than others. Each adds to the unique image that exists of whatever society or civilization they were produced in. Written word attests of unique cultures and characters. How much can be learned from a note hundreds of years out of date? How about the drawings left by a child 800 years ago? The oldest known children's drawings ever found. Onfim, or in older translations, Omfim, or in Greek, Anthemos, was a child from the medieval Russian state of Novgorod. Onfim was the eponymous artist of these archaic drawings. Who was Onfim? Not anybody, really. All we have about him is from his own hand. It is not exactly known when he was born, what he became, or when he died, simply that he lived in Veliki Novgorod around 1240 to 1260 AD. Onfim's doodles are the lone autobiographical documents of any child from the Middle Ages, as far as we know. So what do these sketches, etched into bark, tell us about both Novgorod and Onfim? To speak on Onfim, one has to speak of the birch bark documents. As of 2018, there are around 956 of these gramoti or bereshti, small notes cut into birch bark ripped from trees, with 20,000 estimated to still exist buried beneath modern Novgorod. The majority are estimated to have been etched between 1050 AD to 1500 AD. When first rediscovered in 1951, the gramoti were revolutionary to the field of Russian history. Before the discovery of the birch barks, Novgorod was assumed to be a largely illiterate society. Like most of medieval Europe, only the elite and clergy were believed to have been literate. The existence of so many small handwritten documents implies Novgorod was special, though. The state was a merchant republic centered around the modern city of Veliki Novgorod. Unlike other feudal states, Novgorod was ruled by a vich, or council of urban and feudal lords. Neighboring princes would be invited to symbolically rule the land with consent of the vich. Novgorod's close mercantile links with both Western Europe, Scandinavia, and Southeastern Europe made literacy a necessity. Novgorod's literacy was a direct product of Kievan Rus's, modern Russia's, conversion to Christianity by Vladimir the Great in 988. Vladimir's conversion, sponsored by the Byzantine Empire, introduced both Christian Orthodox culture and scholarship to the region. Greek scholars brought the Greek alphabet to Rus, which was adapted as the Cyrillic alphabet. The introduction of a written alphabet brought a great advancement to previously pagan Rus. The two alphabets would be used interchangeably for the next 100 years or so. This created a unified culture in both Kievan Rus and Novgorod, which embraced Greek Orthodox culture. This process of education continued with Vladimir's son, Yaroslav the Wise. Yaroslav continued his father's efforts to both Christianize and educate the population. As Grand Prince, Yaroslav, by his Christian name George or Yuri, introduced rudimentary educational systems to both Kievan Rus and Novgorod. He invited Greek priests and monks to both preach the scriptures and instruct in writing. By 1030 AD, church schools for children and the general population were opened. One of these institutions Onfim likely attended about 200 years later. Yaroslav then set the conditions for Novgorod's public literacy. Not just nobles or scribes, but both craftsmen and general peasants could all write to some degree. Since paper was not common in Russia until the end of the 15th century, birch bark, or bereshti, was used instead, a substitute used around the world before paper was common. What is unique about Novgorod is these gramoti were preserved in the city's soil. The bark was mass-produced by stripping birch trees, which may have resulted in deforestation around the city. Still, birch bark was common and easy to access in the area. While raw bark was sometimes used to write, it was generally stripped of its rougher layer first. The birch bark was first boiled, after which rougher outer layers were removed. This resulted in the soft bereshti, which could be cut into on both sides to write. Students were taught to write with a stylus and wax tablet first. After they had mastered penmanship, they were graduated to a knife and birch bark. Since everyone carried a knife, the process was accessible and easy. Writing was an incredibly commonplace occurrence. The birch barks were often used as both personal notes and letters. Once finished, the writer or recipient would rip the note up and dispose of it in the dirt, where they sat. This hasty, thoughtless disposal is why so many gramoti were preserved. An estimated 20,000 are believed to still be buried below modern Novgorod in varying archaeological layers. Unlike other locations, the city's soil is mostly clay-based. Anything organic that is buried in the soil is protected from the drainage of rain or floodwaters, while the bacteria that produces rot cannot grow on it. Nearly all of the Bereshti disposed of in the last 1,000 years that were not burned in fires survive in the soil, along with medieval tools, utensils, and toys, as 90% of medieval household objects are believed to have been made of wood. The birch barks are not unusual then. As the city sank into the soft soil, entire structures were preserved in the clay. This means the ground below Novgorod has several definable archaeological layers. Birch bark can then be dated to one of these many groups. It was inevitable they would be dug up eventually. Notes hundreds of years old, perfectly preserved in the clay soil. The first was discovered by Nina Fyodorowna Akulova during a dig on July 26, 1951. The overseen professor, a very Russian name I will attempt to pronounce, was the first to realize what the expedition had found. A.V. Artashovsky, or Arkazhavsky, believed the group had stumbled upon something that would totally change Russian history. The discovery was no understatement. When invited to a historical conference in Rome, Professor Artashovsky's presentation shook the global history community. Artashovsky admitted, while presenting his paper on the subject, his team was still making discoveries daily back home in Russia. Once finished, the professor was handed a telegram from off the stage. He read it, listing off the day's discoveries back home. The crowd exploded into cheers and gave him a standing applause. By 1995, the seasonal digs had turned up around 759 texts, the oldest dated to be between 953 and 957 AD, the last group originating from around the 1400s, after which paper began to replace birch bark as writing material in Russia. By 2018, 956 of the gramoti have been catalogued, all with varying contents. These random notes then offer a unique look into medieval life. The birch barks are the most numerous first-hand documentation of day-to-day lives of the common Novgorod citizen. From war, to work, to life, to love, they cover all topics. A majority are exchanges between two people, often with the response being written on the opposite side of the letter. These letters reveal an interesting insight into medieval social understanding. Many of the recovered birch barks were torn up by hand, often to remove their names and addresses. Private correspondence shredded 100 years ago, then put back together. Scholars are literally reading people's ancient diaries and love letters, a temporal privacy violation. Some Bereshti even include more lascivious accounts. Some make mention of juicy gossip about supposed theft and bestiality. Others are more innocent. One, written by Gavrilia Poznia, is a letter asking his relatives to visit him in Novgorod. A few of them are shopping lists or just merchant's inventory. Love letters and military memos were always anonymous, though. Many opened with such phrases as, "I kiss you, be so kind," or simply, "Bliss." Birchbark number 521 is perhaps the most in-depth plea for love. As the paramour wrote to his lover, "May your heart burn and your body and soul burn for me and for my body and for my face." Some are more vulgar. Number 35, from Radoslav to his brother Zotislav, states, "Yakov, brother, fuck lying down," a phrase literally telling him to pay back a greedy merchant. Both are about screwing, just not in the same way, so get fucked, Zotislav. Others are more complex. Number 562 and number 607 are actually two parts of the same letter, as the original had been ripped in two. The full letter reports an account of a crime. Zhiznobat, a Novgorod freeman, has been murdered by the Seviches, and they took his inheritance. A pre-modern account of murder and robbery. Not all birch barks are about everyday occurrences after all. The case, cold as clay. As much as we only know Onfim from his drawings, we only know Zhiznobat from death. Both individuals are largely lost to history. A few are interesting for linguistic reasons, the result of contact brought about by trade across Europe. One birch bark is Latin written with the Cyrillic alphabet. An older document, from around 1020, reads in Germanic Latin, "Pil gefol im ki," or "spear fell him not," an incredibly cryptic phrase. Matched only by number 292, which contains the oldest known example of any Finnic language written down. Written in the Cyrillic alphabet, it reads, "God's arrow, 10 is your name, the arrow is God's own, the doom God leads." Whatever it means is anyone's guess. Among these hundreds of letters, a dozen are by the eponymous Onfim. Catalogued as birch barks number 199 to 210, the Gramoti by Onfim were not intended to be letters. These were schoolwork given to the boy by a teacher. He seems to have grown distracted in the middle of his work, though. These birchbarks are a mixture of half-finished classwork and drawings, exercise intended to help memorize the alphabet and learn scripture. Most eventually devolve into Onfim's random scribbles, but each scribble gives us insight into the pre-modern adolescent mind of Onfim and his times. Numbers 199, 200, and 203 include Onfim's name in Cyrillic, or in Greek, Anthemos. Number 201 is a simple alphabet exercise akin to a worksheet. Number 202 includes Onfim's stylized depictions of both his parents. Number 206 begins with a section of scripture until Onfim decided to draw an army. Number 199 was even written on the bottom of a birch bark basket Onfim apparently made off with. The creature upon it holds a sign proclaiming greetings from Onfim to Danilo, Daniel, like a message from Onfim to a friend or classmate. Experts date these birchbarks to be between 1240 and 1260 AD, while they estimate Onfim to have been between 6 or 7 years old when he drew these due to his penmanship. He was likely simply practicing with a knife or stylus in most of these. What else would a Russian boy draw in the 13th century? Dreams of being a great hero or monster, of course. Number 199 proclaims, "I am a beast," and number 203 cries out, "Lord help your servant Onfim." Birchbark number 200, or the warrior, begins innocently enough. The letters in the upper right-hand corner are the start of an alphabet exercise, until Onfim wandered off and doodled himself as a warrior on horseback. The scene shows him running down an enemy with some abstract weapon. How do we know it is Onfim? That scribble right next to the writer is Onfim's name/signature, pointing out to whatever reader that he is in fact the writer, a childhood fantasy of slaying the enemy. Number 203, perhaps the most abstract of Onfim's work, begins with the plea, "Lord help your servant Onfim," a common turn of phrase of the period. The actual image is a bit more bizarre with varying interpretations. Experts assume the figure is Onfim, the rest of the chaos is debatable. Some believe it is another boy hiding behind a tree, others think it is a monster as it appears to be standing on a third body. One explanation is that the picture is simply unfinished. The original intention appears to have been to depict a battle of some kind. Perhaps then Onfim was crying out to help vanquish his enemy or monster. Onfim's other drawings are less fantastical. Number 205 appears to show a boat, a common sight in the mercantile region. Number 207 displays a figure, which may be Onfim, reaching out to an unknown hand. It is possible they may even be passing a birchbark note, but the image is too abstract to say for sure. Number 202 is a drawing of Onfim's own parents. Which is which? Nobody's sure. Onfim did draw his father again in a later composition. It displays the two in a happy moment of bonding. Even hundreds of years ago, children loved their families in their own ways. The world around them was not static. Onfim and Novgorod both existed. Why is Onfim so important then? Are these not pre-modern scribbles that would just be hung on a fridge today? Yes, they are. What is remarkable is that we have Onfim's drawings. After nearly 800 years, random drawings from a child still offer insight to the boy that drew them. His drawings are the oldest known drawings by any child that is preserved to today. They are the only reason people know Onfim existed. These drawings are his only mark on history. It was rare for a children's drawing to be preserved. Onfim's is the only instance of such work surviving the ages for so long. The clay preserved Onfim's signature. His signature is the most unique aspect of his work, too, no matter how sloppy or nearly illegible his handwriting may be. Either by coincidence or intention, Onfim signed his name on his artwork, a rare occurrence on any art before the 16th century. Since most art was religious before the Renaissance, few artists signed their works as it was devotional in nature. Onfim, no matter the quality of his art, was one of the first to make his name known, even if it was unknown for hundreds of years. When the Bereshti were recovered, Onfim's story was uncovered with them. Onfim accidentally offered future scholars a glimpse into his world. It is odd to look so deep into simple alphabet exercises, but Onfim's work is a wealth for cultural history and his own legacy. It is rare, before the 16th century, to get such personal information from such an obscure figure, even if it was just a random boy's daydream doodles. Fantasy has always been commonplace for students in classrooms across history. Onfim is much the same as the modern student then. His work and subjects were different, but he was still a student. It is more interesting to theorize what inspired Onfim to draw these pictures besides sheer boredom. What did Onfim not depict? How aware was he of the world beyond his school, family, and scripture? Would a young boy have witnessed such violence? Or are they just pure fantasy? Onfim's dream of becoming a warrior. At the time, it was fully expected for Onfim to grow up to be a warrior, merchant, or priest. How violent or sacred was the world he inhabited can only be abstracted. In the end, Onfim was a boy with boyish interests. Nothing is known of him beyond that. He speaks only in his drawings. What became of the boy in the birch bark? Nobody knows. Onfim only emerges from history for this one brief sequence. Then he falls back into obscurity. There is not really a beginning nor end to his story. It is more a brief anecdote. One would wish more could be said on such a unique figure, but there's nothing more to be said. He could have grown up to be whatever anyone thinks he became. Warrior, merchant, or priest. Onfim's world beyond his work is impossible to know for sure. A great contrast to today. There is a surplus of information on any individual. That is only a product of the last decade or so. No society before the 21st century enjoyed such pain or pleasure. Even Novgorod, overflowing with notes, could not compare to the internet. What does remain of the birch bark was a product of Novgorod's brief golden age, one that ended with the sack of the city by Ivan III in 1478. Onfim died long before this, though. His memory perished with Novgorod and the world he knew. It remained only by being sealed away in his birch bark drawings as an odd little artifact. A lost memory of Novgorod. In that brief memory, Onfim stands alone as the first child known fully to history, autobiographical testimony of a near nobody. While he and Novgorod's memory decayed, the birch bark did not. It remained so we can know of Onfim today. Lucky that. It makes one wonder what miscellany will remain from modern society, to be remembered when history does not.